All right. How you doing, Lavan?
Hey, Narum. It's good to be with you.
Yes. Good to be here in public with you too. We've had a lot of private discussions about what I want to go over here today. Basically, a new wave of education and technology, as you put it. That's a very good title for this video. Um, the way I look at it is like a middle way, a non-extremist viewpoint to navigate the world, to avoid this constant pendulum swinging that always messes culture and societies and great civilizations up so much. Um, yeah. So, what do you think about that?
Yeah, man. Well, we've talked about this for quite a few times. Um, the middle way. When people hear that, there are a lot of things that probably comes to mind. I imagine that some esoteric understandings of that. But for the layperson, to just simplify it, really, I would guess to me it has to do with sort of wedging in creativity in between what somebody would call like a secular outlook compared to a religious or maybe like awareness based outlook, because there seems to be like this schism
Right.
and
Yeah,
the
like
pendulum swing between one or the other is what I feel like you're kind of talking about.
the balance between logic and art. There's either people go
Yeah.
way logic, too much logic, or too much art to where their brains fall out, and there's not uh, a middle way that's walked very often. Those people are laughed at or ignored, and those are always the people that have to restart civilization after it's blown into bits by these two extreme sides that humanity constantly um, manifests. People aren't interested in a balanced approach or way of looking at things, or a balanced technology tree that kind of lets you live without screwing up everything or relying on some larger system of things. And it kind of just aggravates me to no end. I don't understand it. Uh, I think in the past, whenever these civilizations fall, the monasteries have to pick up the pieces. And I don't know necessarily if they're the middle way, but they're the closest thing that has survived and exists in reality. These people that kind of are off grid, living in the middle of nowhere, and they stick to these old technologies that are very robust and always birth new societies and cultures and civilizations out of them. Once everything else is just kind of falling into pieces, and I suppose what I'd like to see is something like that. Not necessarily a monastery, but a place like in Isaac Asimov's Foundation series, like a place where we can soften the fall that is inevitable, that always happens, without being like just a prepper that isolates and just stockpiles food, but people that are actually out there finding solutions. Like, if the power grid does fall apart, what are some little engines that we could, set up in people's neighborhoods or something to give them a little bit of power or something like that beyond solar, beyond wind. Like these Stirling engines that I've shown you, these little models that I've built. Why are those ignored? People use those to run the first locomotive engines. There's a modern submarine that runs off of a Stirling engine, the Gotland class submarine. Um, I've seen people run cars and little boats off of them. It's so that's just one example of what we're talking about here. The new
So
wave
let
of
me just
technology. Yeah, go ahead.
let me rehash this. So basically, there's this idea of the monastery, or the synthesis between what like we're talking about, the middle way. And you're saying that it existed in some kind of form. Perhaps maybe it leaned in one direction or the other. Maybe we could say that it really leaned towards the religious. But I think if if we educate ourselves in history, we will find that art and religion has always gone hand in hand.
Mm-hmm.
And but that that dips itself into a different discussion about esotericism and the occult and things like that. But so that's monastery idea. Regardless of how it happens, maybe it should happen again. And I agree. I think that's an extremely attractive idea. And then on the other hand, we find ourselves like in the future where maybe the things that we should innovate aren't the things before, and we have new kinds of ideas that we need to work on and try to synthesize what we're using in current day. And there are a lot of alternative technology sorts of ideas that we should talk about. But before we get there, I think I wanted to talk about like how can we even do that, and what are the considerations leading into just to be able to construct this, and why is it so important? And one of the things I hear is that people don't really think that they can start over from scratch anymore. We have calculus and astronomy and physics, which emerged, I would say, from these places, these schools, these monasteries, and eventually they diverged and became more and more secular. It's a subject of discussion within philosophy about who was arguing for what, to get rid of what part of a piece of art that was tied to the previous more religious canon, and how was it updated to what we have now. But on the point of like how is it possible that it could happen again?
Well,
and one thing that I'd like to say is that they were very creative. So Leibniz, who we have the notation from calculus, he was religious, and he had this whole philosophy about the monad and things like that. And then Johannes Kepler, who we know him for the three laws of astrodynamics, he actually used these laws to create his own version of the tones, or what they call the music of the spheres. So my point is that I think creativity to me was at the forefront, because when you have like a group of people working on science or math or something, I think part of the reason why it has such a negative presentation is because, well, I mean, for as long as I've lived, I've never heard of such a thing. I've never ever been taught these things. I had to go, look them up myself and find out. Like, I'm basically being taught like a chopped up piece of history for these scientists. We're being given their accomplishments, and it's being presented in this secular fashion, when really it's starting to seem as though they were all driven by art. Like, it's almost as if the science was just something that they wanted to develop along the way, but that their curiosity and their inspiration was driven by the unknown. And yeah, I mean, I guess that's what I got to say about that.
Well, you bring up a great point. How is this possible? First of all, you have to believe in something strong enough to have a community willing to spend their lives doing this. And, that's why monasteries keep, holding the bag, that after society crashes. I think, you're going to be hard pressed to find something stronger than, God or religion, to motivate human beings to work on these problems. Which is, the whole reason I want to even have this conversation. In the Isaac Asimov's Foundation series, of course everybody's like not religious and they're doing it for the good of humanity and all this and that, but it's a fictional book. Something like that has never happened in real history. But so many people nowadays are not religious, and the ones that are, don't seem, I don't know. They're busy doing other things. I won't say that they're not interested in these problems, but they're very busy in the current system that stop it. They're not very interested in dealing with this. They're engaged in the current system that is falling apart right now. And maybe it can be saved or whatever like that. But I think it's a good idea to have a type of a backup plan, because if history's taught us anything, there's not much that can be done to stop it from falling apart once it starts falling apart. And nobody has ever seemed interested in like having a backup plan, or some sort of technology, now that we have all of these resources at our fingertips, to create a foundation of some kind, where we can't fall straight through the ground into total darkness for thousands of years, as happened with the fall of Rome.
Yeah, and it's like it's like presenting this idea that we need like a knife behind our back to do the right thing, or to get our head straight. But I think that point is a little bit misunderstood. Like, we're sold religion throughout time as this like dark and dreary thing, but really, like, it is a point of solace for some people. But this is a delicate conversation, because like, while I think you and I want to fly the flag of this, seeking this solace, or this creative power hidden within the attraction to the unknown, it doesn't mean that we want to go and just sell out and make everybody Christian or Catholic or whatever, whatever kind of denomination
right.
that is popular. I think that's part of the pitfall, and I think that's why some of these other ideas are really important, such as we've called it the Slayer mentality.
Yeah.
What does that mean to you?
What that means to me is not allowing any form of narcissistic thought or controlling behavior, or how do I put it? I was going to say like shame tactics, but I do believe some things are worth shaming people for. Some things we should be ashamed of, so I hesitate saying that. But how do I put it? Just kind of like this bullshit overinflated ego kind of thing. And also, with that said, having a little bit of an ego is important, so you're not depressed constantly, and you're not, and that you have a little bit of confidence about yourself to achieve things. I I think we have, that's why I'm on and on about the middle way. It's difficult to even start to talk about because we spent so long shaming ourselves, um, having an overinflated ego, um, and then in the middle part of the 20th century, everybody was on and on about ego death, and we're all one, the hippie movement, and I get it. I think that was a good start to try to balance things out and get in the middle way, but it went way too far to where nowadays nobody has an ego. If you have an ego, it's toxic masculinity. You are now shamed for having an ego, and it's so far to the other side that the pendulum has swung that there's going to be a huge tidal wave of it swinging back the other way, and we're going to be right back where we started before the hippies did anything. And it's just infinitely aggravating to me. It doesn't have to be that way. The conservatives are right about certain things. The liberals are right about certain things, but they're not right about everything. There's we have to cherry pick these things. There are very important points to having an open mind, and there's also very important points to being closed off to certain things so it doesn't hurt you. And I guess it's become so difficult to talk about that everybody's just abandoned this middle way, and they're not interested there because it's very lonely in the middle way. It's nobody's out there. You have both sides taking pot shots at you, and you don't have your own alliances and things because you're making sense, and you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to make sense. You're only allowed to cheer for this team or that one. And it just feels like sports. Politics and the way the world is just feels like sports. Like it's become that boneheaded on both sides of everything.
Yeah, I can definitely see why you say that. When you say about the Slayer mentality,
yeah, not allowing any of that, either side. Just being your own individual. That's the Slayer mentality to me. Being yourself and having the wherewithal to defend your points and not let anybody come in and control you. Be it a Christian saying that you're going to go to hell, or being a liberal that's calling you a Nazi. You can stand your ground against both opponents, and they can't find arguments to get underneath your skin and make you lose your cool and make you lose your shit. And you don't need them. You don't need their approval. You don't need to be a part of either one of their groups, and you're fine without it. You're just going to go off and do your own thing and do your own work without them. That's full circle what the Slayer mentality means to me.
Yeah. And historically, these monasteries, perhaps maybe they were looking towards religion because they actually had the same thing that they were chasing. So maybe they didn't call it the Slayer mentality, but they had their own understanding that of how this narcissism kind of happens, and perhaps sometimes different mystical texts give like psalms or different verses from the Quran or whatever, or the Bible, like allows the individual to try to contemplate this idea. And how do we stop that from happening? How do we stop being narcissistic, and how do we engage? And I feel like we're at a point where I hear enough people talking about ways to do this without any kind of crutch. I'm not saying that spirituality is a crutch, But I think that religion is a crutch. Religion is not spirituality. But I mean, before we go there, what is it exactly that we can do to be more of a slayer, and what do we even mean by slayer? Let's talk about that. Like, let's get deep into it. So, I think that when the private life comes into the public life, if the person is not aware of what is bleeding into the way they treat others and the way they see the world, and they can't tell the difference between their actions and the residue of their hubris getting caught up with something that is objectively a discovery, to essentially the private life and the external world. Personal stuff we should know about. We should know about our mind. We should know what's going on. External stuff, it's a discovery. If we have assumptions on what's external, that's, to me, that's like that part of that bleed out. I was influenced by a lot of media, lots of creative works. One of the more recent ones was a revisitation with this series from the 90s, Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Yeah.
And that was interesting because it was, I feel like she showed a lot of ways for the audience to understand what it really takes in terms of understanding the world, because she has to in philosophical discussion, when you say something that is nonsense, or you come to an understanding that is like, you realize you were wrong, you recuse yourself, but the understanding of the Slayer goes a little bit further, because you can't. It's like your actions are permanent. You may be wrong. Let's say you take this idea and you run with it, and you find out 5 years later you're advocating something that's absolutely, completely rubbish. And you're not alone. Other people were wrong too. You recuse yourself. Okay, big deal. But the problem from the Slayer's point of view is that the Slayer is learning to see the world accurately from a psychological perspective, which means that those kinds of mistakes have repercussions on other people's minds. You have these ideas in the world that are muddying the ability to see things clearly, and such as this whole like transhumanism thing that you talked quite a bit on your channel. I would say that, like, just right off the fact, like, you could be pro-transhumanist for 10 years and quote-unquote recuse yourself, but the harm has already been done. We're in a situation where we need wisdom, and so to be at the 0 point, no points won, no points lost, isn't good enough in that sense. Like, we need to be proactive and seeing things happen before they happen. And to me, that's a part of the Slayer mentality, and how we could approach trying to create these sort of philosophical or societal structures similar to these monasteries. It's curious. I'm gonna have to do some research on this thing that you're talking about, because I've heard of it. I've read about it, but I don't know any specific examples. It's a beautiful thing to sort of dream about, because like ultimately all I want is time to be able to work on projects that need to be worked on.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of other people out there that feel the same way. Like, they just want to be left alone to work on this stuff. Everybody is obsessed with saving the world now. Everybody I talk to, everybody for the past 5 years that I've talked to on the internet, is obsessed with trying to save the world in one way or another. And not in like protesting or political effort or whatever like that. Like, they're just off working on their own, trying to figure things out. And that's a hard thing to do. That's a hard thing to do on your own. take on the whole world on your shoulders like Atlas. Like people need help. People need to help each other. And there's a lot of people out there that I think would be interested in working together. Um, but there does need to be some type of organization because there are other religions or other organizations that are doing these things um, for their own reasons in their own way. Um, and I suppose I dream about there's a bunch of people that understand to walk in the middle way with this Slayer type mentality. I think people call it, uh, have all these different names, like alpha male, beta male, sigma male type of shit. And I don't know about any of that. I don't know what all that is, if all of that is accurate or whatever. I think Carl Jung had a lot to say about archetypes, and I think archetypes are a little more accurate um, for what people are doing and how they play their role in the world. Um, and I think there are a lot of people that are playing this role.
Yeah, I agree with that.
That we're talking about here that need a little support, need people to bounce ideas off of, and make some of this stuff happen instead of, as we said in the beginning, a lot of this pointless philosophy that I hear all over the place. Just utopian flatulence is what I'm calling it now. They're just talking about these ideas and this constant intellectual masturbation into the void that never results in anything. People don't even remember the conversation, and they all just get mad at each other. They're just spinning their wheels in the mud, and nothing is ever getting anywhere in many of these communities. And if their goal is to just hang out and play therapist with people, all right, cool, whatever. But I think what would help people more than anything is to have something to build, is to have a future to actually look forward to, rather than getting on the internet and talking about this weird stuff that they found somewhere. And most people are going to try to shove their weird stuff down your throat right back. People aren't. There's no real questions being asked anymore. There's no genuine philosophy being pursued. It's just circle jerking.
Yeah, I agree with you. Did it become perfected? And one of the things that I'm trying to wrap my head around is, every once in a while you get like a speaker who will be talking about some kind of less popular field or something like that, and essentially you're starting to get the fact that you have mathematics and then you have like science, and they're part of the same thing, but really, like, mathematics, it doesn't really exist. It's a system to try and describe what we need for science. And so in that sense, science is actually like a process of being clever about how to utilize everything in your surroundings. And so that it's like part of classification is basically systems of being clever, and the most clever is the most practical, most pragmatic, and most useful. Because like everything already exists, we just need to learn how to use it. And unfortunately, some of this attribution of like, the etymological wars that I feel like is tied to this issue that we're talking about. And it's part of also why the reason people are fighting and stuff like that is because, everybody has a perception in terms of this etymological war, like what is meaning, what is a fact. And I think that on one hand of the pendulum, you have people who want to say a fact is a fact.
Yeah.
It's kind of recursive, because essentially it's like saying, I put a pencil in front of you. The fact is that that is a pencil. There's no meaning, right? But then the other person would say is like, well, what? How could this be improved? Or where did it come from?
This pencil is a simulation.
Yeah, perhaps like what is the meaning of what we're trying to do when we write?
Yeah.
And those things do go into the cleverness of science. I like how you immediately provided the example of that mentality.
Yeah. It's the AI. They're controlling it all, and your destiny is controlled through an illusion. It's there's just no room for, I want to just say, normal people. So that's what I'm going to say. There's no room for normal people, I feel, anymore. You got to be totally over here or totally over there now.
Yeah. Well, I really feel like everything would be solved if we could offer something to satisfy that need to jump out of bounds, to go a little crazy. What are people really trying to do? And I think that's, go back to the religion thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's not going to work. So then what is it? Well, I feel like it just like you got this ball rolling, eventually keeps going back to the center. Alternative technology. Ideas that maybe have been around for like 50, 60 years that don't get any attention, or that maybe they're something that we use every day, and that's the most that we've discovered the use of those kinds of things, like capacitance, or like Faraday waves and batteries and sonar. It's like that. Those are distinct phenomena, and we don't have very much experiments focusing on that side of things. It's kind of like considered a deep end, and we've done things that sort of tie it into quantum physics, but ultimately it's like on the practical side, the physical experimentation is like you have to go like a couple decades into the past, and then a few into the future, and a few in between. There's a couple guys doing some research and focusing exclusively on the phenomenon of what I'm saying is like, to me, it's like seemingly interrelated. It's capacitance and waves, sound, things like that. We're messing around with plasma, but what about sound and plasma together? I have a lot of interest in those kinds of things, and I'm not really sure to take it from there.
Okay, I got a direction we can take it in. It's a bit of a segue, but it'll all interrelate after a minute, because I have a point with the monastery thing. What do you think is going on with the Jordan Peterson crowd of clean up your room, rediscover the past, rescue your father from the belly of the beast, and the Jonathan Pajot crowd of interpreting literature and movies symbolically, and seeing the world in this new, well, it's not new, rediscovering this way to see the world through a symbolic perspective rather than a purely logical one, kind of a blending between art and logic through this symbolic thinking. What do you think is going on with that? And do you think there's potential for those crowds to pick up the torch and create a type of foundation as we're talking about here? That because they're not close-minded religious folks. They, because I've talked to a lot of them that have gone to these things, and I have my problems with everybody, including you know, Peterson and Pageau and sure nobody's perfect though, but I do believe that they have hit something important. They have definitely struck a nerve, um, and that's not that's not for no reason. That's not a coincidence. There is something that they have discovered that has rekindled the human spirit in a way that religion hasn't been able to do, in a way that science hasn't been able to do, in a way that politics hasn't been able to do. Yet it blends all of those together in a way within those groups, and creates enough motivation for people to, say for instance, clean their room and then go forth out into the world and start to clean it up too. Um, yeah. So what do you think is going on with that? And do you think there's some potential there, for a new, let's just say, religion to sprout up out of that could take the world by storm, very unexpectedly, as a new way
Well,
of thinking?
I think that he essentially has an analog to what we're talking about here. We're all just using different words. Peterson, in particular, he does the clean your room thing, and I think there are multiple ways to look at this. I think that there are like layers to the meaning that is taken by people, and some of it is relevant to what he wants people to like take away from it, and something else that people might take from it is more general kind of reaction, just with something about the human spirit. I think that is universal in a way, and what he's saying about clean your room is part of the Slayer mentality. You can't recuse yourself. You're having an impact on the world every single day, every single moment. You're leaving behind a trail. So clean your room. That's what I think he's really trying to say. He's saying, people are going to notice. You can't hide that shit in the professional world. And so people are, and this is part of what I would consider like a religious impact or spiritual impact. He is igniting a sort of common sense spirituality, that I think many communities had. It's sort of like, we have all these different sayings that people have said for hundreds of years, and some of them still exist, and I can't think of any off the top of my head, but we all know that they're there, and I think that this is sort of an attempt to do that, and they've always like sort of had a interface between folk understanding of the world and religious understanding, and so that's what I think they're doing, and they're also rebelling against this philosophical canon that we're trying to parse out here, in terms of the rigid, systematic, logical. Science is using logic for illogical purposes. They may be,
Right.
but ultimately, when you're clever about something, it's not about staying faithful to like the direction that any kind of discovery is leading you. It's about using it for convention. That's what we always do, no matter what. And I think that if you just let yourself get carried away, you're no longer in charge of convention, thus the rebellion. So he's encouraging people to rebel against that. And so the whole thing has a very rebellious nature. You could call it like, I mean, I do believe in spirituality and like esotericism. So I would say it's like, I think that we are called to become something, and some of us are being called to this thing, and he's one of the incarnates. He's one of the candidates. He's a Slayer candidate. And it's not perfect, but how could we refine that? Ultimately, is I think what's powerful about the core of this mentality is that the same idea, cleaning your room, also isn't encouraging you to be fearless. And there is a common goal underneath it all where, perhaps you need to fight your fellow slayers to figure something out. And that's not going to be a problem for any of us because that battle will be a clean battle. Whereas, like, between us, we're not fighting against, some kind of person who is nitpicking about etymology and trying to pause the progress of human will. That it's not going to be a fight like that. It's going to be a clean fight where either we're going to, I guess when I say it's like a clean fight, I'm saying it's not going to be a battle between two lesser evils, or not picking a lesser of two evils. Sorry, but we're going to be picking like a competitive analogy of what life is about between two greater goods. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, it does, because they're going to be, a lot of people are going to be attracted to these higher morals, to escape the hell that's unfolding right now. People are going to get sick of it. Like a lot of people are leaving or have been leaving California and going to Texas, or going to other parts of the country and fleeing from the chaotic ways of life, to I guess a more traditional kind of thing, country living, if you will. And I don't know if that's what you mean necessarily by one of these greater goods, but a part of that.
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
Okay.
I mean, a good example.
Yeah, because I do think that part of this greater good, it's impossible to achieve without recognizing and remembering the past, instead of throwing the baby out with the bathwater and saying every one of our ancestors in the past was a horrible Nazi person that deserved to die, and they're evil and bad, and nothing they did was worth of shit, and the only thing that matters is the future, and we're the best people ever on earth. And that kind of thinking is wearing out, and people are going back to the past and looking at it fondly, and wanting to integrate that into their modern lives, and they're kind of getting freaked out by the Neuralink, and kind of don't want to go to Mars, and sort of maybe want to stick around on Earth and have a farm, instead of this weird cyberpunk future that's kind of coming up really fast. And I can feel people just pumping the brakes on that whole thing. They're like, I don't know. What? What are you talking? What are you talking about? I don't know, man. Can we get off here? And
yeah, that's how I feel.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm irritated because I have my own view of like what a futuristic image, and to me this is like, to me it's just, I'm sorry, it's just stupidity, because I think that the futuristic ideas, maybe I'm just idealistic, but I imagine that most people have them, like the real futuristic ideas at some point. Maybe I'm wrong, but they don't look like this.
Yeah.
And what the fuck are those futuristic ideas? Well, it has to do with some kind of like question about the mysteries in the past, and we have these, that goes into the discussion about like the pyramids and Is history right? Do perhaps what we think is prehistoric is not as prehistoric as we thought?
Yeah.
And that kind of like questioning, if we try and build a futuristic society with what we have now, it's like it's a really dirty steampunk. It's like
Right.
bit punk. What do you call it? Like byte punk? Registers, electricity, cables, Wi-Fi. Like everybody's getting fried, and they talk about people are like try to whistle or sorry, um, they try to poke a hole in the concern of Wi-Fi because they say like, well, there's no electricity. It all gets like nullified. It doesn't escape your body. That's why this and that doesn't happen. But the thing is that the frequencies cause like these spikes in the cellular structure and the musculature, and this is a part of those science projects that nobody's interested in, and it's like this little portion of the future is getting snipped out just because people don't care or they're ignorant. I mean, I really can't imagine the mentality of somebody who is like championing the current state of tech. It's like it feels very Mad Max. Like like this is all just like prototype bullshit that doesn't feel very advanced.
Well,
and I can't proudly say like, yeah, I'm in the future and we have futuristic technology. It doesn't feel like that at all. It's really, really irritating.
People have lost hope in humanity, and they've abandoned it in favor of the AI. That's what I'm seeing. They're like, only the AI can save us. And I think that's such bullshit. That, and it's very dangerous thinking. To put your faith. I mean, what a leap of faith there, first of all. We're us humans that you say you hate so much and are flawed and you can't trust are going to build a machine to fix it all? Like, what? That's just such circular logic. I don't understand. There's a divinity attached to it. They've attached all their hopes and dreams. Like that movie, The Zeitgeist Movement, that Peter Joseph guy. He was like, the only way we can have a future is Brave New World and the computer decides everything and maybe a little Soma. He didn't say that, but I was just waiting for him to say that or something in those Zeitgeist Movement movies. To not realize that you're constructing a brand new techno religion that is just as flawed, if not more flawed, than the ones that they criticize, because they're usually atheists and they're always criticizing every religion on the planet, is ludicrous. It's insane, and it's not pointed out nearly enough just what a logical fallacy it is. And I relish in saying it that way because I hear them all the time. Oh, it's a logical fallacy. It's that's a straw man argument. Blah blah blah. They're saying this bullshit to try to belittle you and make you feel stupid. Meanwhile, they don't have any clue what they're asking for. On behalf of all of humanity, thrusting this artificial intelligence upon the entire world, and at the core of it is pure hatred and resentment for humanity. Yeah, that's just the point I wanted to make.
Yeah, no, it's also the reason why we don't have a good coverage is because of this. I wrote this down as a concept to talk about in and of itself. So I'm glad you brought it up. I call it the scapegoat.
Okay.
We're teaching people to scapegoat instead of teaching them to learn to live. And I think that there's something really wrong with encouraging cognitive dissonance. I'm so passionate about it that I feel like it's a crime. Like if you're going to impose cognitive dissonance on a child, especially if you're like a teacher and that child is not yours,
Yeah.
I feel like you should be fined or like a 2-year sentence or something, with like enough warnings or I don't know. It's like it's part of the problem. And right now, you can't stop people from interacting on the internet, so it's a complicated issue. But quantum physics is being muddied because of this. Like people have an understanding of quantum physics at a very basic level, which is essentially this. It's a claim to the real divinity that we're looking at, and some of these people who are trying to quote unquote keep it logical, keep it real, they don't even understand. Here's what I'm seeing: you have advanced topics, and then you have lay people who are interested from one way or in one way or another, and then you have lay people who are quote unquote, they're into the woo side of it, and then there are lay people who are trying to they want to pay lip service to this currently dominant philosophical canon. Those people don't necessarily know the science any better than the woo people, but they want them to be perceived as taking advantage of you. Like if you think that quantum physics and the research and the experiments means something about you interacting with some kind of subspace waves and photons and stuff, and you're communicating underneath it all, if you take that and you believe that, then you're a fool. And if you're trying to teach somebody else that, you're also a fool in that sense, or even worse, shame on you. And that's what they're saying. But the thing, what I've looked into is that it's a little bit complex why the people on the woo side are correct in this case. So it's like this infamous sort of double slit experiment, and if you're not familiar with it, you shine basically like a photon through a slit, and then you open up 2 slits, and it shows this interference pattern. If you put it shows a what's it called, a dot interference pattern, right? And then if you do something like you put an observation meter or like a little camera next to the area where it passes through the slit, it breaks back into a wave pattern.
Right.
And that's supposed to like mean something about the observation of it affecting the particle, where it's like if it wasn't observed, it would be a particle. If it was, and it turns into a wave. Well, people are saying, well, observation is a scientific term for recording a measurement. There's nothing human interactive about it. But what they don't realize is that the reason why that the meter affects that is because of the heat exchanged between the particle and the camera lens, or the machinery on the inside of the lens, which is the same thing that our eyes are doing.
Yeah, the observer effect, yeah.
Yeah, so it does have to do something, maybe not necessarily brain waves, or, we can get less woo about it, but the point is that something about us observing that is us recording it is the same thing.
Yeah.
So to say that it's not about observation is actually, they're trying to sweep it all under the rug. They're not actually like, they don't have a reason other than just wanting to be right, but they don't actually understand what they're saying, and they're wrong. And so in this sense, the woo people are actually right simply because they're willing to perhaps in this case, it's like a matter of faith. And that it's just a very interesting thing, where it's like the attempt to be logical ends up actually being an attempt to be narcissistic without knowing the difference. And this, to me, it's not even about this experiment. It's about this whole atmosphere that you're talking about. We teach people to scapegoat, and it's done in schools. Like I said, the whole Johannes Kepler idea.
Right.
He developed these things. Yes, he was looking at the stars and the planets, but ultimately it's like he was doing it to create. He also had this creative project going on at the same time, and they want to like cut that off and make fun of us for having a creative vision. And what if that, what if we're supposed to remain a kid and use the kid as an engine to get to all these scientific places that we can go, provided that we have an interest? And
yes,
so
you would foster that growth.
Right back to the center of what we're talking about with the middle way and the
somewhere along the way in elementary school, that path, that middle way, is destroyed and obliterated for many people, except these slayers out there. It didn't happen with me. It didn't happen with you. It didn't happen with a few of our other friends that we both know and talk to. And we just kind of stayed who we are, despite parental pressure, peer pressure, societal pressure. We're like, you know what? I'm not convinced any of you have a clue what the fuck is going on, and so if you don't mind, I'm gonna go ahead out here and try to figure it out for myself. Thanks, but bye. That seems to be a very difficult thing to do. I mean, and I'm not going to sit here and talk about how, oh yeah, that's easy. That's an easy way out. I can see why a lot of people want to stay on the paved road, as I say. The path society lays forth for you, and not question it, because you do get a lot in return. You also sacrifice a great many things, such as your individuality, and your ability to go explore and find things out for yourself. There's a lot of people that just kind of jump into college, and by the time they're 30 and they're done, they realize that's not ever what they wanted to do, because they weren't allowed this space and time to develop, as a teenager or as a kid. You were in school, kind of being told what you need to be doing, what you need to be learning, and just kind of this regurgitated curriculum, where every year you're basically learning the same shit in a little bit of a different way for 12 years. Maybe the last 4 are a little different, but it's just such a waste of time. Whereas you could be learning critical skills when you're 14 and 15, such as how to build a house, how to run a business, how the economy works, what you can do to find medicine in nature, all of this well-established stuff that we already know. There used to be a wood shop in high schools, at least, where you could learn how to run a power saw, you could learn how to build things, you could learn how to do stuff, and women, they could learn how to cook and bake things in home economics. Very, very critical adult skills that people constantly comment on TikTok or Instagram, saying, I don't know how to do this, I'm just going to throw it in the microwave. It's kind of like a dark joke to them that they have no idea how to live their life, that they weren't prepared by their elders, and then they're ridiculed by those very same elders for not knowing how to do any of it. How strange. Well, what a strange paradox that we find ourselves in. You know, nobody thinks that we're good enough, but also none of them taught us how to be better than them. No wonder everything's falling apart. No wonder everybody's so confused. Um, and that's really at the core of what we're speaking about here. You know, there is no foundation left for humanity. You know, not any kind that I see in the West. And we're just kind of thrown out into the world and ridiculed for like not knowing how to fly. It's like we were set up for failure, you know, except for these, you know, people that were like, oh, you're full of shit. I don't trust you. You don't really know what the hell you're doing. And kind of going off and blazing your own trail and doing your own thing. But with that said, I have also met very many people that tried to get into this Slayer mentality, but they never ended up blazing their own trail. They never ended up like setting up their own camp. And they just have hatred and resentment for those that followed the paved road, because at least those people have a house. Or at least those people do have something and they're rewarded by society in some small way. Whereas these other people that kind of went out on their own find themselves with nothing. And that's unfortunate. But if you do choose to go out into the woods, you better be prepared to learn how to live and survive within it, instead of expecting society to like have your back. That's not the point of striking out on your own. That's not what you're gonna. It's not an easy life that you're gonna find becoming an individual, self-individuating. And I just think that was worth mentioning, because I've come across that many times.
Yeah, it's strange. Curious to like wonder, when did this mentality become popular? Where does it really come from? The whole scapegoat thing. You know,
Right.
it stinks of like what we don't think is happening. You know, it stinks of slavery. It stinks of feudalism. People think they're free. You know, like, pick an institution, pick a job, you'll be free. And doesn't really seem to be the case. There seems to be a point at which we buy in, and then we lose that sovereignty. But then on the other hand, there's a danger of never buying in, or never staking the claim, having actually been uncolonized. It's definitely a relevant discussion, considering like a lot of the scapegoating actually right now having to do with the racial divide and the attitudes of like the wokeism having to do with that.
Yeah.
It's really irritating. That's its own rabbit hole.
Yeah, and
I mean,
what's infuriating about that is that there isn't actually a racial divide. It's a cultural divide. You know, you can have, you know, all kinds of people that are different colors, different races, but if they have a shared culture, there's going to be no conflict whatsoever. And then if you have a whole bunch of people that are the same exact race, same color, in the same room, yet one of them is Christian and one of them is woke, there's going to be a huge fucking problem. And that is the problem. That's what it is. It's a cultural issue. It's being dressed up as a racial thing, like this unfair, you know, which that racism is unfair and a very bad thing to think and embody. But that is not at all what is going on. It's being mistaken for racism when it is in fact culturalism. And there's no way you can get around that. You know, people that believe different things and have a different culture and a different set of values and moral values, the best you can hope for is they don't fight each other in the grocery store. You can't expect them to, um, get along ever, because both of them hate each other. We can maybe live in the same state, but asking that we're crammed into the same neighborhoods and stuff, that's that's not going to be pretty for anybody. It just doesn't work out that way.
Yeah. I mean, on the topic of cultures or people who think that they've been treated badly in the past, I think that we are actually vulnerable because there's the fear of being talked down to or condescended. And also that there are people who are trying to speak up in a populist way
Yeah.
about some of these things, but it's not necessarily helping anyone. Like the Mexican president is trying to get Spain to apologize for the conquistadors and all that. But he's also not really like pro Mexico. Like he's not trying to make things better, and he's just as much of a fearful sellout as every other one. Yeah, and it's like, and then with the whole thing with the veganism and stuff, it's like I don't really agree with going to a ranch or like bull fights, or what do you call those when they have the guy who's like on top of the bull, and then the one that's like doing the flag. I forgot what they're called.
Bull riding or rodeos?
Rodeos.
Okay,
yeah.
rodeos.
All that stuff. Like going there and trying to like virtue signal in front of all these people. To me, this is all like that person doesn't understand the game that's being played. It's being played at a much higher, much more violent level. When I say higher, I mean, more psychologically confusing and indirect and more abstract. If it was easy as stop doing all of these things that we consider violent, that would be great if that would solve it. But unfortunately, we actually need attention on a lot more abstract sort of issues and conflicts. Trying to address them is difficult because people are going to want to hear solutions. And unfortunately, one of the solutions is understand that there is a subset of thinking that's just completely wrong. And I'm not like able to say that because of like who I am or whatever. It's just I have information that would make me impervious to being able to be indoctrinated in that sense. And to me, it goes back to, your private life enters into your public life, and you either are grown up about it or not. So if you get into a cultural conflict with somebody else, and you're not aware as to how your misgivings and your whiny self is affecting the conflict, you're gonna think, well, something happened to me. I was caught in this inevitable conflict. But at some point, the cause is actually already has the effect encapsulated within it, which is simply a person's state of being. This whole idea of like the holographic existence of awareness is I think to me it's a part of this middle way. And people want to get rid of this, and it's really infuriating. There's actually an experiment that was done with a dolphin and a sonar, and it revealed that essentially sonar, for the way that the animal sends it, is actually like pretty much a literal image. So when how do those animals see, and how do they communicate? What is all this stuff about? It is essentially they are seeing images in sound form. If we understand that sound and light are essentially the same thing, perhaps it's slightly different above the water, but the experiments in water show that essentially there is this whole sort of hologram, because no matter where you take the reading of the wavelength, it's going to give you the same image, the same hologram wherever you pick it up from. It's going to contain the same information. It's going to contain the part of the whole
right
in any part of it.
Much like how our brain works. If your brain gets damaged, and you can make those connections again. Like if you get a stroke and you forget how to walk or something, you can relearn how to walk by tapping into that ability, that holographic ability that our brain has, of keeping little copies of everything in different cells.
Right. And while this is the experiment is being done underwater, the part of it that's holographic is the sound part, which is not restricted by whether it's underwater or above water. And so there is evidence that this is something that should be researched further, and I think that there's actually enough information out there to kind of give make a pretty good theory that not only is our talk and our speech holographic, but our existence is as well to some degree. And something that kind of blew my mind recently is that when they show these images of waves, these experiments were done in the 1831 by they were originally called Faraday waves, cymatics and stuff like that.
Ah, yes, okay.
And so this is like really old, but in the textbooks today we have all these pictures of waves, like these little snakes, right? Just these little wavy lines. But with all the information with this research, it's pretty clear that there's no such thing as just this wave going across. Why are we teaching it that way?
Right.
When all waves are emitted from a center point and actually have like a 3D holographic structure.
Yes.
So it's like we're given this like snippet of what is this potentially an entire field, and we're just immediately gone into the technical minutia of how to apply this for commercial purposes. And that's what essentially textbooks are there to prepare us to take knowledge and commodify it immediately. Because it's not about knowledge, it's about finding a job in this very short lifespan cycle of being a slave. And it's just it's really ridiculous that people don't see this,
Yeah.
There's no snake. It's
right.
like being sent
like
out
a sine wave,
at,
yeah.
360 degrees, at every point. So like omnidirectional, basically.
Just you were talking about dolphins earlier, weren't you? And I was just thinking, what if dolphins are thinking in these cymatic ways?
Exactly.
Yeah. And they have a much freer way of imagining and thinking than we currently do. I'm not saying that we can't, but our culture has an enormous bearing on the way that we perceive everything. And I just do wonder what could be unlocked with beginning to see things in that way, um, and teaching mathematics in that way. You know, everybody's getting real obsessed with this whole metaverse thing, um, to escape their life. But you know, I do wonder if that could be applied to explore these, uh, let's just call it cymatic realms or new ways of thinking and perceiving, to actually get inside of a mathematical structure and work a problem out, like a huge game of Tetris or something like that. Uh, you know, you've seen like some of these movies where you have this savant and you're in their mind and they're able to do this. And I guess I could take that a step further. Maybe we could just get rid of the metaverse thing altogether and find ways to do that ourselves, um, to really tap into our imagination without all this assistance of technology, because I do feel like that makes us lame in many ways. You know, where we're crawling along at a snail's pace in our consciousness when we could be, you know, taking off and flying. Like I think the Egyptians did that. You know, I think they were able to think in ways that are totally alien to us and come up with clever, simple solutions to build mega structures. Um, I think there was a lot of different cultures that did this. You know, you look in Thailand, um, and you look in Central America, and they just built these monumental structures that we have no hope of replicating with all of our cranes and helicopters and technology today. And they also, you know, there's a lot of evidence that they used psychedelics in a responsible way to tap into this. I think a lot of people don't do that. They certainly abuse the psychedelics, and they just use it as a crutch for their emotional problems, and they become trapped. Um, you know, they don't want to think that they're addicted, but they would be lost without their buzz or without their, you know, their trip or whatever, you know, because they have nothing to build. I think a lot of these cultures in the past were so stable and they lasted thousands of years because they had something to build. They had something to look forward to, you know, and there's a lot of evidence that the people that built the pyramids were not slaves as we originally thought. They were very well fed and maybe even proud people that were a part of a grand project that their society undertook.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, we're talking about access here, and I think that everybody wants that, but this is where the conversation is like, could expand. We've talked about the issues blocking this from happening, but if we could just get past that, there's a very rational mindset that could spread like a wildfire if people were gently coaxed back into a place where they were allowed to accept that their imagination, as you say, was actually a part of the critical thinking process.
Yeah.
Because it's treated like an anathema. It's not true at all, you know, considering everything we've said. And you know, even if there were civilizations where like slaves were used and stuff, there's this concept of separating the information from the user or the speaker, you know, and to give things the credit for which they are due because of how they might be able to be useful for us. And you know, and there are a lot of mysteries that, given some experimentation, may not seem so mysterious. We might be rivals to what previously was thought as these untouchable ancient civilizations, these people who built these like crazy hieratic structures. What if we end up finding out that that's actually somewhat of a good idea in some kind of way?
Yeah, it's a good idea to pave a road, maybe participate a little bit in paving that road, and if you're interested in going off and blazing a trail, the society supports that, instead of, cracks down on you so hard. And it's like, maybe that's an interesting idea. And for the people that hit a cliff, yet they proclaim that it's the new way, be like, you're crazy. We're shutting you out. Like, you can go do whatever you want to do, but we don't want to build a road off the cliff, type of deal. The middle way. Just kind of I see the value in trailblazing. We also see a value in building a road, and we can all work together here as a team, and make some stuff happen. Because, you learn in life studies, in a lifespan class, that there are certain stages, and people are more interested in blazing these trails when they're younger, and then they figure out what they want to do, and then they bring back this knowledge to enrich the tribe, enrich the society, and then they're like, I've got a new way to build a road, or if we built a road over in this direction, this would help everybody out a lot, and then people would listen. And those things that I'm speaking on are just lost. We're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to kind of explore and figure things out and do things. You're forced into this building of the road, to these very boring places where the civilization becomes stifled and stale, and you have all these other people going off the beaten path, without the support, and then the resentment does arise, and all of these things. Yet there's just, what I'm trying to say is, there's just a disconnect between seeing and realizing and understanding these things, and there's so much resentment and bad feelings in the way of everything. I think that is the source of these constant collapses. The constant tug of war with this pendulum, that ends up knocking everybody over, which is the frustrating part to me, because I do see evidence in the remote history of humanity that we did have it figured out. Like, we had something going for us. And I don't know what ended up happening, but I feel as if in the past 2,000-3,000 years, maybe even 5,000 years, we've lost it. We don't get it anymore. Like, I don't know. It's just not apparent to us anymore as it once was, because some of these societies, they lasted for thousands and thousands of years. And now you're lucky to get one to last for, 200.
I think we just took the wrong train. We're at the wrong stop. The people in charge haven't figured that out.
Yeah.
They want to, because I think comfort is the real anathema, and that is all the world is right now.
Comfort, yeah.
It's just convenience, and it was the wrong bus. I think the right bus was actually in development at the same time, and it just didn't get interest and funding, and instead we had this sort of culture that exploded with technology and the internet, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's just I don't think it was supposed to be like the main selling point of everything.
Right.
Like you got electricity and a radio, telephone, maybe even like a cell phone is fine. And with that, essentially, we have everything that we needed, and all this, everybody's got a computer, everybody's got like advanced rendering software. There isn't as much appreciation for, I would say, like, it's about the aesthetic perfection rather than the meaning associated with spirituality and the occult, esotericism. It's not understood. It could probably change everything if that got better coverage. That's what I always think. I mean, I basically am hardcore respect for animist traditions because of how they sort of naturally encompass all those things. Like going all the way back to the time when the roads had like sigils of Hecate all over the place, and are in Europe, and something like that, is basically what is lost, and I can see it coming back. I can see technology having something to do with it. The imagination has to have some place to play, and what's interesting about esoteric development is that there are a lot of fun, interesting, exciting things, but it is a very playful way to experience what most people would think of like as hard life lessons, or what it means to come of age, is encapsulated within being serious about a mystery tradition or a kind of practice, pursuing the truth through that form. You're not able to progress unless you actually want to grow up. And so while it has sort of like, I think it has a very bad understanding and representation within academia, but it's actually very serious, and it has a lot to do with being in tune with nature and respecting the elements. And one of the things I like to say is like the wolf or the lion, these predatory animals, they have a good lesson for the human. It humbles us, not because we're the prey and they're the predator, but because that attitude and that violence that we fear from the predator is it's the residue of our misunderstanding, which they correct us on, which is that it doesn't matter what kind of house you live in or how much safety you have. Ultimately, in the face of nature, in the face of like the mysteries, there is no safe place. It's a lie. We are an animal. The home is the forest. The home is hardship. There is no such thing as a house metaphysically. It may be a place that we guard, that we try to protect from the elements, from others who are trying to do us harm. But ultimately, in the face of nature, it's a temporary structure meant to produce something of value. It's not a permanent thing. And we've basically bounced off into the most extreme interpretation of that misunderstanding. We've taken the misunderstanding and it's become, this lie is ruling the world right now. That's what people think makes them better off, and it's like, it's not true. Somebody who's faced hardship, somebody who has an opportunity to grow, is better off than somebody who's locked themselves in a mansion for 10 years with everything that they could possibly need. It's just not true that your property is a part of you. The only thing we actually own is our soul. And I think this also can be understood as part of the underlying metaphysics of what is being talked about by these, Jordan Peterson types. It's like clean your room is preparing you for reality. There is no room. The mess doesn't mean anything. You show up to the world, it's going to judge you on your actual belongings, not the mess that is holding you back or making you misunderstand things. Like, your actual quality is the only thing that matters. It's cleaning it up, is getting it out of the way, being prepared.
Yeah. You've said some things that have sparked some thoughts in my mind that I want to get out. I think it's interesting that we destroyed the wolf here in America, and not long after that, we kind of started to destroy ourselves. In the same way that the Romans kind of destroyed that independent masculine part. You must be a part of the society. You must be a part of the Roman Empire. And that destroyed them too, because they were so reliant on, caravans and supplies. Nobody was growing their own food, really. They became comfortable. And in the same way, we have become very comfortable. We always are destroying the wolf, metaphorically or literally, or even both, in order to feel safer. But what it actually does is weakens us and destroys us from within. We have to be able to live with the wolf, and live with that sort of wolf spirit within us as well. Otherwise, everything just constantly falls apart. It's not allowed to happen. And I think, it's interesting in the book of Genesis, talking about the Garden of Eden, is a walled garden. It's not where, they had to go kill all of the predators and all of the other bad stuff. All of the dangerous stuff was allowed to exist outside of the walled garden. We just need to build some walls. Is kind of what I'm roundabout getting to. You don't have to dominate the whole planet, because by killing the wolf, we have created a lot of issues, ecological issues in our forests. And basically, human beings and the DNR officers have to work around the clock to ensure that the forest ecosystems don't collapse. And people have to hunt in order to maintain deer populations and whatnot. Human beings have foisted upon themselves a bigger responsibility than ever before, a godlike responsibility to balance the ecosystems. And it's not working, because you have these invasive beetles coming in over here, and you have this other invasive species coming in over here. And I watched this little documentary about Yellowstone National Park, where they reintroduced the wolves, and something amazing happened. They started, killing the animals and keeping them at normal population levels. They didn't eat all of them, and all of the other herbivores that were eating up all these other plants, those plants were allowed to come back because they were in check by the wolves. And then these other species started to come in, And then somehow, I don't quite remember, but all of these creeks and streams started to sprout up. And then there was water everywhere, creating even more vegetation for even more habitation for all these other herbivores. So by simply reintroducing wolves, they they manifested creeks and streams and more life. They actually brought life to the Yellowstone National Park. And what would this place look like if wolves were still around and we had good strong walls? Because we do need to have our farms and have our property protected, but that doesn't mean you need to destroy every predator out there just so that you feel safe. We just need to have better walls and not such shitty fences. That would go a long way. Like, why can't we outsmart the wolves by having better walls? Why do we have to, assert our dominance by murdering everything and calling it, a job well done? That's the less intelligent route to take. Yeah.
Yeah, it would really, yeah, I really agree with what you're saying, because I mean, when I say there's no such thing as a home, it's about understanding that it requires maintenance. It's not something that you can like relax into.
Yeah.
And this idea of like walls is interesting because I can see like a sort of a way of understanding where we sort of deconstruct the city structure and idea, and we force it into a structure that that in order for it, the rationality for it existing is required, or is dependent on it being as close to nature as possible, and meaning that you would require it to have these divisions between what's inside and what's outside, and that would bring everybody in the city like face to face with nature. Like it doesn't matter where you live, everywhere, essentially like just sprawling like forests like all over the place, destruction of as much useless commercial concrete as possible, building safe havens that are sustainable with nature, meaning that the inside was also green as much as the outside was. Everybody's going to have their own vision, but like I'm just showing you how it sort of works into what you're saying, sort of works into my vision. Because instead, what we have is we have this I don't know, it's just very weird. Like it's weird thinking we're in the year 2022 and going around and seeing all these like just really crappy outdated styles of construction, and it just like it's very interesting to think this way, because now stuff that seems old is starting to seem like relevant. Like if we could build advanced types of stone structures with this idea of sustainable living, it's cleaner, it's easy to take care of, it's not toxic. Definitely a lot of different ways to play with the idea, I would say.
Yeah, and with that said, I'm just thinking here. I'm just spitballing. I wonder if there's ever been humans that have kind of trained wolves to like hunt for them. And my idea of that is coming from, we make things so much harder on ourselves. then I think they need to be. And that's fine sometimes, to try to push the limits of who and what we are, but if you really look at what we can do, we can get things to work for us in our favor. Not only in our favor, but in the favor of everything else too.
I've always heard that they can't be trained. Um,
Well, I've seen, wolf
just like
sanctuaries and stuff, and there there's people able to get in there with them, and they're able to do things. But yeah, I don't know to what extent they actually can be trained, or maybe not even trained, but um,
oh, I see what you're going where you're going with this.
just like, oh, you're not gonna eat all of that, are you? You know, we'll give you some other shit that maybe you want uh, in exchange for it. I don't know. I know that's probably a stupid ass idea, but I was just thinking about it in my head, like our relationship with animals, and could you have a relationship with a predatory species like that, like we have with dogs?
Impossible.
Yeah.
I don't think it's impossible. I think I see where you're going with this. I had to change my mindset a little. It's like almost. I mean, the idea of changing ourselves and our understanding of what it means to be human might include that as a requirement. Um, accepting the predator. Um, I know that there are things you can't control, but I feel like the predator wants to kill the weakness, not necessarily the individual.
Right.
And then sometimes it's just hungry, where it goes either way. But I do think that there is a murderous rage towards something that is understood through some kind of sympathy, and I think that we could learn. And it goes back to the whole sound healing for me. What are we emitting essentially?
Yeah.
And we emit it with not just our voice, but like our body and things like that. And an insect can sense your anxiety. So like a wolf probably, I would imagine they could smell it too.
Right. Because all
So I see where you're going.
all
with that.
dogs came from wolves, so at some point we were working with literal wolves, and hanging out with them, and they were doing stuff for us. I'm not very well versed in that like history, but I do know that about dogs, and it's particularly big cats. Like tigers and lions, they can be trained. So what if you could just give the predator a job, and live in some kind of harmony with it, to where they do, get rid of the weakness in the ecosystem, and they also bring you back a little food, and you give them a nice, warm, dry place to sleep. That is something humans can offer. Maybe, and pet them, give them pets. They seem to like that a lot, but maybe not if they're very wild. But it did start out like that. There were these wild packs of wolves, and maybe one of them was a straggler or a lone wolf, and then a human gave it some food, and they started to hang out and do shit together. And then at some point it all went to hell, and we killed them. We had a good thing going on, and somebody messed it up. Is just kind of my line of thinking on that whole thing. We wanted to do everything. We wanted to do it all, man. We want to really embody this. We are gods of this earth, and we are going to control the ecosystem. And here in 2022, we're finding out the hard way that we're not able to do that. It's not working. And maybe we should revisit this idea of fostering a relationship with the predators, with the predator spirit even, um, in order to have a healthy planet, in order to not worry about every little thing and then come up with these crazy concepts like, oh, the AI is the only thing that can figure it all out and calculate this and it'll save us. Like, we can do that. And I'm just like, I think there's a simpler way to do this, maybe. Maybe we're putting the cart before the horse a little bit here with the whole AI has to calculate and figure it all out so we can be better gods and all this kind of deal that I hear everybody preaching about. And it's a literal preaching. They're just preaching and preaching that this is going to save us all.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good sentiment. I think that there's a lot of communication to be understood and deconstructed. I think, like, we were talking about the dolphins, and you mentioned how they, like, what are they really saying?
Yeah.
Well, I've seen some pictures of their songs in hologram form.
Ooh.
Well, it's absolutely beautiful. It doesn't. There's so many different cymatics of different tones. You helped me, to get into some of that research. But when it comes to the dolphin song, what's interesting about it is that it's like super it looks like a formal mandala. Like the concentric rings are all exactly the same from the center to the outside. Usually with tones, you have some kind of like geometric structure, where this one looks like all the little bubbles at the flower part of it is just the same for each concentric ring. It's very, it's like, what if that's like a word or a sentence, and what does a wolf howl look like, and what does it mean, and what do these things mean about ourselves? That's what I think about where you're going with this, and I think that it's about time that these things are not considered woo anymore. But unfortunately, I think a lot of this commodification mindset is every person who buys into the society has this cap to look forward to, and we've got to take off this cap and start thinking about, like, it may not be as much about entertainment as it might seem. I think that's the misunderstanding. Let's say somebody hears, oh, you think wolves are saying something? Haha, it's funny, you watch too much TV.
Yeah.
Well, I'm pretty sure somebody who's like in the wild, who's been almost brought to death, doesn't intensely focus on these kinds of ideas, but it just naturally is a part of what's running through your head in survival situations. Just because you're living amongst, you got to know what is around you, and the mind is just simply ingenious. So it's not entertainment. It's not this woo shit. It's this kind of like, it's more somber, down to earth sort of natural way of interacting with nature. It's realistic.
Yeah. Yeah, and in my mind, all of this kind of weaves together around this Slayer mentality. I think it was once a understood, and I'm certain named another term besides the Slayer, but there was at a time a reverence for the wolf and an understanding for that need to balance nature out, instead of the way that we just carelessly abandon it. at our own peril. Um, and if anything, that's kind of what I would like people to focus on and think about is what are we throwing away, um, and in favor of what, um, to what end and for what future that is increasingly looking like Blade Runner or this cyberpunk game, which is based upon that largely. Um, this hopeless world where people are isolated, nobody can stand up for what's right, let alone even knowing what the right thing is, out of fear of being called toxic or being called, um, you know, insert bad word here, but being in the warrior spirit, in the spirit of the predator, of for the good of all things, attacking these weak ideas and testing them, and helping the ecosystem flourish, both physical and metaphysical. We also have a societal and psychological ecosystem of ideas and thoughts and culture that are hurting really bad right now, from this lack of Slayer mentality, from this lack of challenge. The atrophy arises, and a lot of people feel lost, and they're cleaning their rooms, but after their room is cleaned, what do we do next? I think that's where we're at. I think a lot of people have cleaned their room, and they're kind of standing around like, all right, what are we gonna do now? What can we build? What can we do together? Um, yeah, and I'm interested in working on that with you and other people, and seeing what we figure out, because this is just the first step. Talking about it. Next part is doing it, and getting in our workshops and making things happen and putting them out there into the world.
Yep. With enough funding, we could literally do anything. I mean, I'm pretty much ready here to start my own brand and start a bookstore, and want to have like a philosophical presence. And there's all these ROP type things that kind of sprung up over the last few decades, and I think that there's sort of an attempt to try and do something similar online. But I think that the institutional thing is essentially, unfortunately, something that has to be fought and taken back. And talking only gets you so far.
Yeah.
I'm 100% down for collaboration, and with the vision, enough people who crafting the same mindset. You could do a Kickstarter, or we could I'm not sure, something. It always starts private. When the next wave hits, it's like somebody started in their backyard, and there are a lot of experiments that we could do. We didn't really talk about too much of that stuff, but yeah, definitely at some point maybe we could get into the nitty-gritty science.
Bass was really interested in doing a talk with us on that, and so I'm glad we got plenty of ammo left for that talk, because he really wants to get in on that. He has some really good ideas on that topic to get deeper into the minutia of that whole technological ordeal. So we'll do that next time. I think a trilogue would be very interesting and beneficial too for everybody.
For sure, man. This kind of sounds like we're starting to end it. Is this where we're going?
I mean, if you have more to go on, man, go for it. We're at the 2-hour mark here. But yeah, you got more to say, man. we can keep it rolling. But if you want to wrap it up, we can do that too, man.
Well, I took a bunch of notes earlier today, and I feel like we ended up pretty much going through everything I would have brought up. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think we covered it all.
Oh, excellent.
I'd like to say for anybody who's listening, this Slayer mentality, you know, it's deep. It deserves its own podcast. I can't remember everything off the top of my head, but I'm fairly certain that this is something that is intertwined with mysticism since the dawn of recorded history. The Vedas and Sanatana Dharma, like they have actually a female goddess archetype, which many gods contain. Essentially sums up this sort of, is very similar to what we're talking about with the wolf. Obviously, there will be archetypes amongst other cultures, like Thor. Thor is not understood. Thor is a part of this. A lot of this has to do with understanding the power of the mind, and yeah, we could talk about that in terms of a historical analysis of where these things might be coming from. It's not just entertainment. I didn't just figure it out or just get inspired by Buffy.
Yeah.
But of course, there are a lot of expressions in media, because media is just recapitulating what has been shown in mysticism.
Yeah.
Media is a sort of, has something to do with mysticism. It's not irrelevant. And yeah, this stuff should definitely, like, if you're inspired by some of these things, pursue it. It's a rabbit hole. Just keep going. So, yeah, that's all I got to say, I guess.
Okay. You got any kind of links you want to share with people, or anything else you want to say before I shut this thing down?
I don't have anything ready. If you're interested, well, for me, the rabbit hole, going into the science part of it, maybe as a precursor to get into the next podcast where I would likely take it. Look into research having to do with the vagal nerve. The vagus nerve is essentially this sort of goes into and around the heart and all around the midsection. It goes up into the ears, near the nose and the eyes, and it has a lot to do with the way we regulate our stress, anxiety functions. Has a lot to do with this scientific understanding of how would we regulate and coax ourselves into becoming warriors. How could we get into a bliss state while in a fight or flight situation? And then look into, you can type a math theory for why people hallucinate into Google to understand the research of how our frontal cortex somehow has some kind of symbiotic link up to the concept of holograms. You know, it might be that the brain circuitry itself is essentially wired to work with holograms, and look into The Secret of Cymatics on YouTube. John Stewart Reed. Very interesting. Anybody who's into the esoteric and the occult, interested in unpacking and getting a fresh look at what might all these symbols mean in these grimoires and all these different things, you know, can we unpack this from a scientific perspective? I think we absolutely can. And while cymatics may have just been sort of a woo, sort of, we might have been sold it like that. It's a lot deeper than that, and visualization, geometric shapes, and things like that might have deeper meaning than we think. So, yeah, I'll have more to say in the future about this.
All right, man. That sounds good. That's some good information there, and I want to thank everybody for listening to our conversation here. There's going to be more to come, and we'll have more guests on, and I'd really like to have like a round table chat going on with a lot of different people to get a good depth and sense of what's going on from different minds, because there's only so much that I can think of and know and bring to the table. So that'll be interesting to try to go forward and bring all these interesting minds that I've come across and you've come across, Lavan, out there in cyberspace. So yeah, thanks everybody, and remember to stay classy out there, and don't let people drag you down and beat you with their dark experience. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end it. See ya.